Dave today. He's back with us on Monday, but there is time for you right now to get your thoughts together, your questions together. Who should I play? Who should I start? Who should I sit this week for fantasy football? And the guy to help us get it done, to help us each and every week, each Friday, 7 o'clock. We look forward to it. Dave Richard, CBS Sports, Fantasy Football, joining us. Dave, it's Jason. Good morning. How are you?
Big boss Jason Ross. Always good to hear your voice, sir.
I think it was one too many losses for Florida State that did Dave in this week, I think.
Yeah, he's going to have a long year.
Yes, he is. It's already happened for him.
Yeah.
How do we prevent it being long years, Dave, for people in fantasy football? It's still early. Bye weeks finally, by the way, so hopefully everybody takes note of that this week.
It's calamity because on top of the bye week, so we know we're without 4 teams. There's a ton of injuries across the league. This is the time of the year where I think you know what you've got with your team, and if you like the depth of your team, or if you've got a lot of players that are hurt right now, you can look at your team and say, okay, right now things might not be so good. And I might even be 2-3, 1-4 after this week, and that's not time to panic. But if you think your team will rebound because you've got injured players that are going to come back, I think you stay the course. If you don't have that going for you, then you might need to make a trade. And so this could be the time of year where you have to go to your buddies in your league, think about what you have to give. What are the strengths of your team that you can give away? And think about what you need in return and which teams in your league have those things that you need, and try and make a square deal with somebody in your league. And that could be the catalyst for turning your fortunes around. So that would be my advice. There are guys off the waiver wire that you can pick up. We just got done talking about it on our Fantasy Football Today podcast, Jay, where Xavier Leggett is still out there in half of CBS Sports leagues. Dontavian Wicks was a popular pickup. He might not be out there, but you can double check your leagues to see if he still is out there. Wan'Dale Robinson is still out there in about half of leagues. Same thing with Josh Downs. These are good wide receivers that are going to get opportunities to catch the football moving forward.
Speaking of wide receivers, as we're talking with Dave Richard, Dave, how about Davantae Adams? Obviously, the close watch on him, if and where he lands. How much of that will be a factor on, obviously he's a wide receiver 1 or 2 on your team, but where he lands, how important will that be for his fantasy value?
It's going to boost his value considerably because he's already playing with one of the worst quarterbacks in the league in Gardner Minshew. And he's already had a great game with Gardner Minshew too. And it came against the Ravens. It was very surprising. But now we're talking about him going to New York to reunite with Aaron Rodgers, or to New Orleans to reunite with Derek Carr, who's played well, at least to start the season. He played well. Maybe somehow he ends up in Buffalo or Kansas City. Great quarterbacks there. He's in line to get a quarterback upgrade. I don't think he's really got a hamstring injury that's going to slow him down. It's just a matter of time and waiting it out. So here's kind of the opposite of what I said to start our interview. Now, if your team is 4-0, 3-1, you're feeling great about your squad, maybe you could incur a loss or two. Make the deal for Davantae Adams, especially if the team that's got Davantae Adams needs help.
Yeah.
If they need help, you can help them out. You can take an L for a week, or maybe you've got a competitive enough team where you won't even take an L. And then when Davantae Adams does resurface in the NFL, it could be sooner than later, and it'll be with one of the better teams in this league.
On the first 2 examples you said, the Jets and the Saints. So let's just put him on either one of those teams. What does he do to Wilson? What does he do to Olave, those type of guys?
I think in the case of the Jets, I think Adams becomes the number 1 receiver immediately. I think there's something going on between Rodgers and Wilson. Their timing hasn't been perfect. By now, it should be. And just the fact that Garrett Wilson has had all these targets and all these opportunities, and he's not coming through with them, I think Garrett Wilson is a super talented wide receiver. We're not seeing that. Aaron Rodgers is going in other directions with the football. I think that would be a great spot for Adams. I think it would hurt Garrett Wilson considerably. Keep that in mind. If you've got Garrett Wilson on your fantasy team, maybe you sell low on him at this point. But if he goes to New Orleans, I actually think it kind of hurts Adams a little bit there. It'll obviously hurt Olave. It'll turn Rashid Shaheed into more of a downfield threat and a guy who's going to be a boom-bust flex. But that's kind of what Shaheed is anyway right now. But what it'll ultimately do in New Orleans is it's going to make them tougher to defend because teams are almost going to exclusively play zone coverage against them because they don't want to give up the big play. Olave can hit for a big play. Shaheed can too. Davantae Adams, he might be old, but he's not slow. He can still make those downfield catches as well. That would raise the value of Derek Carr. It would probably hurt the upside of Olave, but not too bad. Rashid Shaheed probably wouldn't start him very often. And Davantae Adams would probably be close to like a borderline number 1, number 2 wide receiver in fantasy, but still a very good option to start. Again, because he's getting an upgrade. He's getting a better quarterback. He's going to see cleaner targets. These are all things that help wide receivers out.
If you have questions for Dave, certainly send them in on our text line, 916-339-1140, our YouTube chat. We had one here earlier. Which flex to start week 5? Kirk, Sutton, Worthy, or Stevenson?
I like Christian Kirk the best of that bunch if it's full PPR. If it's non-PPR, it's much tougher to pick a guy out from that lineup. Normally it would be Stevenson, but there's talk that he could lose his job. And at bare minimum, Ramondre could split rushing downs work with Antonio Gibson moving forward. So it's really tough to trust Stevenson in any capacity. I think the safe option would be Christian Kirk.
I know Worthy was on that list there, but what changes now, Dave, with the Chiefs and Rice's injury?
This is assuming Kansas City doesn't go and add somebody along the way here. And I'd be stunned if the Raiders and Chiefs made a trade unless the Chiefs overpaid, and I just don't think that they would do such a thing. I think he's going to see more playing time for sure, and we're going to see Worthy potentially get a couple of deep shots every week from Patrick Mahomes. I'd like to see him get some shorter throws. He's more than just a go ball receiver. When you watched him play at Texas, he had a very diverse route tree. He ended up being a very good wide receiver for them. And I'd like to see that come to light with the Chiefs. It's just a matter of that actually happening. As far as replacing Rashee Rice on the field, my money's on Juju Smith-Schuster to be that guy, but I don't think that means big numbers for Juju Smith-Schuster. Maybe he's around 3 or 4 catches every week, some weeks 5 catches. Maybe he averages around 9-10 yards per grab, occasionally scores a touchdown.
Who are some of your best plays, your best values for week 5 this week?
So let's start at the quarterback position. I love the matchup for Trevor Lawrence, and Lawrence has been close to connecting on big plays. I'm over the moon for Brian Thomas Jr. I irrationally have him ranked as a top 15 wideout this week, and I think Trevor Lawrence can put it all together and have a good game this week. He's one of my favorite bye week replacements. I think he's got good value. I think Sam Darnold is still good value, but ranked ahead of both of those guys at quarterback is Justin Fields against the Cowboys. I could see him having a very good game. He's had at least 20 fantasy points in each of his last 2 weeks. Let's go to the Raiders. There is a good Raider to start, and it's Alexander Mattison. It appears that he's going to be the lead back for them moving forward. He's a good pass catcher out of the backfield. He doesn't have a great matchup. Denver's been really good defensively this year, but he will get opportunities. Opportunities matter more than talent when it comes to fantasy football. He's kind of a borderline starter among running backs. Kareem Hunt on Kansas City looks like he's the lead back for the Chiefs against the Saints. Not an easy matchup, but I think he's got a chance to score and maybe even touch the ball 15 times. At wide receiver, you mentioned Xavier Worthy. I think Jordan Addison has a chance to build off of the big game that he had last week. I know that Jets secondary is dangerous and their pass rush is good, but you've got to give Vikings credit for what they've done this year. They've taken on defenses that play the same way as the Jets, and they've done very well against them. I'm talking about the Niners. I'm talking about the Texans. I think Addison is a really good bargain this week and a good value. Wan'Dale Robinson is another one with the Giants. He's still out there in a decent amount of fantasy leagues. A lot of catches coming his way, especially with Malik Neighbors sidelined for the G-men. And then at tight end, I'll just give you some names. Tyler Conklin, Brenton Strange, and then ahead of those guys in my rankings, Tucker Kraft. A cheesy name for a Packers player. Nice. The cheeseheads love him. I think he's going to end up being pretty good.
How about this week, Gary, and broadcast the 49ers games? They play the Cardinals this week. There's always some, probably from each side, I'm sure Harrison, Murray, those guys are regulars, Purdy. But who are some of the guys you like in that Niners-Cardinals game? I'm
actually nervous about Kyler Murray because his track record against the Niners is not good, and he's been terrible in 3 or 4 games this season, at least in terms of fantasy. And James Conner has been running the ball really well. And if Fred Warner doesn't play for the 49ers, that's going to open up the middle of the field. It's going to make it easy for Arizona to run on the 49ers without Fred in the defensive backfield there. So definitely keep an eye on that. But Kyler Murray is someone that I am very nervous to start. I do like Purdy. I think he's safe this week. I don't necessarily think that he's going to go and have 3 touchdowns, because his receiving core hasn't exactly lit the world on fire, other than Jawan Jennings when he had his big game against the Rams. Jennings is a flex. Ayuk is closer to a flex and a must-start. Debo's still a must-start. Jordan Mason, absolutely, you know what to do with him. Must-start. So is, going back to the Cardinals, Trey McBride and Marvin Harrison. You're going to get those guys in your lineup.
We don't talk a lot about kickers in fantasy football, but they've actually been off to a pretty amazing start. Drafts have already happened. I've never really asked you on that. Where do you really value these guys?
I don't. I play in a lot of leagues where kickers aren't even part of the starting lineup requirement because people just what a lot of leagues that I was in, and this was a long time ago, Jason. I'm thinking this is like 8-9 years ago. They got rid of starting a kicker and they replaced them with another flex spot. And so what we've kind of seen now are fantasy leagues. You'll start your quarterback, 2 running backs, 2 wide receivers. Okay, that's normal. 1 tight end, that's normal. And then 2 flex spots instead of 1 flex spot and 1 kicker. And it's more fun and you get more points and you've got some tougher lineup decisions to make. You get another player that you're not sure. Before, when you were starting a kicker, you'd have to choose 2 players for 1 spot. Now you've got 2 players for 2 spots. You might feel a little bit better about that. I do very minimal research on the kickers because not a majority of our leagues use them anymore. But obviously studs like Brandon Aubrey, Evan McPherson, they're going to be must-starts no matter what.
You know, going back to last night, obviously, hopefully you already played them if you had Cousins and or Mayfield. Certainly Cousins had the massive yardage day and overall day. But Mayfield's having a really good year, and I'm thinking about him paired with Evans and Godwin and really what they have offensively. Where's he kind of rank on your QB list?
He was 6th for me this week, so that came out looking good. But don't ask me where I had Kirk Cousins ranked because it was nowhere near as high. So one of the things that we look for with quarterbacks is who's capable of putting up good numbers every single week. And what does it take to do that? Well, if you don't have a great running game, you should be able to throw a good amount of the time week after week after week, especially if you've got good wide receivers like Mike Evans and Chris Godwin, like you mentioned. Your defense can't be that good either, because if your defense is really good, that's going to limit the amount of pass attempts that you'd theoretically have because you're not allowing very many points to your opponent. And so you can win the game in the second half with a very simplistic offense. You can just run the football. The Bucs, I don't think have that. I think their defense is aggressive. That doesn't mean that they're necessarily good. I think last night would be an example of them not being very good. And I think there's that path that's going to be there every week where, okay, the Bucs have some running backs, but they're not dominant. They've got great receivers. Their quarterback's great. Here's an important factor. The offensive line is really good in Tampa. There's a lot of teams where we look at their offensive line. Go look at Cleveland's offensive line. It's terrible right now. And then their defense just isn't that great. And so that leads to a formula that makes the quarterback reliable almost regardless of the matchup. And the only game where Baker's really been bad was week 3 against Denver. And Denver's defense has turned out to be one of the best defenses in the league so far this season. So that's kind of a surprise. I thought that defense would be terrible. Turns out that they're not. They stymied Baker Mayfield. No one else has been able to do that. I wonder, though, in the case of Kirk Cousins, does he have the exact same thing? Is that defense good? I'd say it isn't. Is their run game good? Cover your ears if you drafted Bijan Robinson with a first-round pick. I'm not sure that run game is as good as we made it out to be. But we know he's got Drake London. We know he's got Darnell Mooney. Kyle Pitts is in the mix as well. That pathway that's there for Baker Mayfield, you can kind of see it for Kirk Cousins too.
Okay, and one last one. We got this coming in as well. Kind of questions, I guess, overall, blend a couple here about the Dolphins because of their significant injuries at QB. But obviously, if you have Hill, I think you still just have to grit your teeth and play him. But how many of the Dolphins are you still playing while they kind of search for their QB identity?
It's Hill and it's Achane, and I thought that there were some close calls between Tyler Huntley and Tyreek Hill last week. And there were still some good throws occasionally between Huntley and Hill, Huntley and Waddle. I think that'll be better this week.
Okay.
So I'm not going to run to the hills on Tyreek Hill. Still a number 2 wide receiver. Let's have mild expectations for him. But I think he could end up having a pretty good game. Waddle, more of a number 3 wide receiver. Davantae Adams, I'm hoping that he can get going against the Patriots. And so I'm still going to start him as a top 15-ish type of running back.
And then they'll have Beckham at some point. Is he worth anything for them?
Who's Odell Beckham? I don't think so.
Yeah. Okay.
I've got him stashed on the IR in a couple of my leagues, but I'd be surprised if he ended up being consistently good for them.
All right, Dave, we always appreciate your insight. You talked earlier about your Fantasy Football Today podcast, but other ways that people can find you, learn more, get all that intel that you have each and every week.
We're looking for reliable subscribers to our Fantasy Football Today podcast on YouTube. You go to youtube.com, search for Fantasy Football Today, hit the subscribe button. It's free, and boom, you've got access to all of our information, everything that we have to tell you to help you win your league. We were recently awarded Best Sports Podcast by the Podcast Awards.
Nice.
So it's a huge honor to take home. And now you can see why we got that award by joining us on Fantasy Football Today. We will also be live on CBS Sports Network today, 1, 12, 11, 10 a.m. your time, Jason. Watch us for an hour to get ready for Week 5. You will have a great chance of winning your league by watching Fantasy Football Today.
Very cool. Congrats on that award. Well deserved, Dave. We appreciate it. We look forward to talking to you next Friday.
Looking forward to talking to you and I guess somebody else.
Yeah, we'll see if he's here. We'll see.
Yeah, hopefully not. This is a good back and forth that we just had.
I did appreciate it. That's for sure. Thank you, Dave. Have a great week and good luck to your teams.
Same to you.
All right. Thank you. That is Dave Richard. Appreciate him as always. What an honor, too. How cool is that to win that podcast award for Best Sports Podcast? That's really, really cool. All right. That's why we have him on. That's the insight you get. We appreciate that. Thank you for your questions as well.